And welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Paul Graney. U.S. farmers will be harvesting a huge economic aid package. Today, President Trump unveiling $12 billion in funding to farmers. In a case that could have potentially major implications, the Supreme Court appears poised to back President Trump in an FTC termination. Paramount has launched a hostile bid worth over $100 billion for Warner Brothers Discovery. What to know about the last-ditch effort to outbid Netflix. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy and Health Secretary RFK Jr. speak at Reagan National Airport. They're expected to announce a new family-friendly travel campaign. Melania Trump distributes toys at the Toys for Tots Drive in Quantico, Virginia. The First Lady and U.S. Marines bring children a little Christmas cheer.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
And it's great to have you here this Monday afternoon. President Trump is taking some revenue from tariffs and replanting it in the U.S. farm industry.
This relief will provide much-needed certainty to farmers as they get this year's harvest to market and look ahead to next year's crops. And it'll help them continue their efforts to lower food prices for American families. And again, we inherited something that we inherited the worst inflation in the history of our country. And we're taking care of it. Farmers are an indispensable national asset, part of the backbone of America.
During that roundtable today, President Trump unveiled a $12 billion farmer aid package. He explained that tariffs have brought in hundreds of billions of dollars, and the administration is taking some of that and providing farmers with economic assistance. President Trump added that he's been working on trade deals for the farmers. He said he's already secured $60 billion in agricultural commitments. He said China has agreed to buy more than $40 billion in soybeans, and Japan will purchase corn, fertilizer, rice, and more.
With this bridge payment, we'll be able to farm another year, help us get by. It's such an honor to be here with you. I lost my grandfather and our hired hand in 2002 in a farming accident. And he instilled in me at an early age to love the land, to take pride in what we do.
Was that a machine accident?
It was a machine accident. And it gets in your blood to farm. It's in our blood. Despite what happened, I want my 2-year-old to farm. I want my 4-month-old daughter to have an opportunity. And what you're doing here in D.C. is working.
Now, President Trump also noted that the estate tax has been eliminated on farms to help with passing down a farm to the next generation. Here's Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent discussing the U.S. economy.
We are now seeing this affordability problem, and I think next year we're going to move on to prosperity.
The Trump administration appears to be changing its approach to concerns about affordability. The Treasury Secretary argues the economy is strong, but he's acknowledging the issue.
What we're not going to do is say that Americans don't know what they're feeling.
President Donald Trump is creating a task force to look at food prices. New analysis of Salesforce data shows shoppers paid more for less this Thanksgiving weekend. According to polls, many Americans are worried about stretching their budgets. Now some Republicans are urging action on the issue.
If you're living paycheck to paycheck, which most Americans are, and you can't afford to make ends meet, nothing else matters other than that.
And President Trump has signed a new executive order creating federal task forces to investigate anti-competitive behavior throughout the U.S. food supply chain. The order warns that foreign-controlled corporations pose widening risks to food affordability and national security. Now, it notes that some companies have already settled price-fixing lawsuits worth tens of millions of dollars. Attorney General Pam Bondi and Federal Trade Commission Chairman Andrew Ferguson have been directed to launch task forces inside their agencies to identify potential collusion or foreign influence. They're now authorized to bring enforcement actions or propose new regulations if they find evidence of anti-competitive conduct. They must also brief congressional leaders twice within the next year on any findings or recommended legislative steps. Now, until a recent meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping, the Chinese buyers had completely stopped buying American soybeans. That left American farmers in a fix. China is the world's largest soybean market, so now the Trump administration has stepped in with help in the form of a one-time payment that farmers will need to apply for. And with us now is Daniel Akaye, chief economist at the Tressis Hedge Fund, managing over $8 billion in assets. Daniel, great to see you as always. Daniel, any farmers we speak with say they just want an opportunity to make a living. President Trump put it, they just want a level playing field. They don't want government assistance per se. As a free market guy as you are, where do you stand on this idea of government aid in this specific case?
Thank you very much, Paul. I think the problem with farming is very, very complicated because if you think about it, the issue all over the world is that farming is so overprotected and it's so intervened by governments that we cannot talk about a real free market. We're talking about an environment in which, for example, through so-called environmental regulations, through enormous subsidies, etc., the competition against the United States is so unfair that you have, for example, the impossibility, as we have heard in the conference that just finished, that some of the farmers have the impossibility of, for example, exporting rice to countries that actually would demand it and continue to demand it, which is affecting prices of food all over the world in a very negative way because it's making food more expensive and at the same time it's hurting US farmers. So this aid is something that is supportive, but it's also realistic. It's realistic because we need to understand that in the European Union, the level of interventionism and the level of subsidization of so many different areas in agriculture and farming is enormous, but also very, very aggressive in Brazil, in India, in China. Think about this. The countries that have the largest trade barriers against the United States in agriculture and farming are those that are actually called the BRICS. They got together, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Those countries have so many barriers, not just trade barriers like tariffs, but regulatory, legal, investor insecurity, so many different layers, including indirect taxes, alleged environmental or local content protection laws. It's absolutely amazing. So I think that what they're trying to achieve with this measure is first to level the playing field. It's not logical that U.S. agriculture and farming businesses are facing an environment in which many of them are going to die because of working capital bills, because they cannot sell their product when the product is demanded, and at the same time, they're putting barriers elsewhere and calling it free trade.
We saw this in this press conference, in this roundtable just now, Daniel. On the one hand, the farmers complaining about environmental regulations around equipment, which is pushing up costs for them. And at the same time, like you mentioned, these BRICS countries, these poorer countries gathering together, and as they put it in the conference, dumping rice and other produce on America and in Puerto Rico, other areas, which, as you put it just now, is not allowing for a level playing field between America and these foreign countries. Now, one phrase that was used was food security is national security. You see it this way?
Obviously, everybody sees it that way. Everybody in the world sees it that way. To the point that what we have seen, for example, we just talked about environmental restrictions. The level of environmental restrictions in the European Union is so severe that it's literally just built to prevent U.S. companies from selling. And in the case of agriculture, is particularly damaging, considering that a lot of the things that are being limited are not just elements that one would consider that could be harmful, but things that then, and this is to me the most infuriating thing, is that on the one hand, there's these enormous trade and regulatory burdens against the United States, but then they lift it when it's time to get deals with Morocco, with Turkey, with Ukraine, or with Algeria. It's amazing. It is truly amazing. So is it an issue of national security? Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. Everybody in the world is talking about energy and food security. And the United States has the quality and the availability and the affordability factors in farming and agriculture that make other countries very nervous, but you cannot just think that they can export all of their excess capacity whenever they want at the prices that Americans pay for and then put barriers against U.S. goods.
Well, on that point, Daniel, during the roundtable, President Trump said none of this aid would be possible without Trump's tariff agenda. Now, some who are critical of that agenda, you could say very free market-oriented economists, for example, they're calling for zero tariffs, zero subsidies. One argument is that no one person or group or government can analyze the market and make decisions on something as dynamic and as broad as the price of goods and services. What do you make of that?
No, as a free market defender, I completely agree. There should be zero subsidies and zero tariffs. So does President Trump. But it should be zero subsidies and zero tariffs everywhere. The problem is that we need to live in the real world. And when we live in the real world and we understand that the trade deficit of the United States, that the imbalances that we just heard in the press conference with farming and agriculture, all these things are not made, have not happened due to the fair competition between different open economies and free companies, but very carefully thought out and very carefully planned through decades of choosing winners and losers, in which the entire way of thinking about it was let China do whatever it wants because they need to grow. Let the developing economies can do whatever they want because they need to grow, and let's put all the burdens on the United States. All of that has resulted in worse food availability, worse food affordability, and more importantly, a much worse trading environment. So right now it's about leveling the playing field. Would we want zero subsidies and zero tariffs all over the world? I absolutely agree. But if you want to start, you cannot start in the United States. You have to go to the European Union, you have to go to France, you have to go to China, go to India, start talking about subsidies and tariffs, and then come to the United States, and then we all reach free market agreements.
But on that point, Daniel, when you think of the Chinese regime, whether it's their targeting of American soybean farmers, which we heard about on the roundtable, or recently threatening to withhold U.S. access to critical minerals, it seems the Chinese regime has mapped out America's pain points extremely well. What do you make of the Trump administration's strategy for countering this?
Well, I think that obviously, on the one hand, China is looking at a competitor and checking for its weak points and trying to make the most out of those weak points. What the Trump administration is trying to do is to strengthen those areas that had been weakened, not because of competition, not because of lack of entrepreneurial strength, not because of technology or because of machinery or availability of human capital, but because of unfair trade practices. And therefore, I think that what we are seeing right now, and it's very evident in the figures, the macroeconomic figures, is that that strategy is working. The one that didn't work was the one in which administration after administration in the United States looked at China from the following perspective, which was, oh, we understand that they're not following the same rules. We understand that they're not following the same practices. They're not doing the same things in terms of quality, in terms of working capital, in terms of their availability of product and the rights of workers. We understand that. Let's let them do whatever they want because they grow a lot and we will benefit from it. Well, it did not generate either a benefit for the United States nor from the rest of the world. It's interesting to see how President Macron in France now has recognized that President Trump was right. And when he visited China, said to Prime Minister Xi Jinping, said, look, this is impossible to sustain in the future. We cannot have a 300 billion euro trade deficit with China and constantly eroding our food, industrial and manufacturing security. Guess what? Finally, he recognized that there is a very difficult environment to talk about free trade when there is not a level playing field.
We see, Daniel, how difficult it is to reverse some of these very damaging policies as the Trump administration tries to rebuild American manufacturing, for example. Daniel, I've got about 1 minute. We heard at the roundtable the Trump administration announcing a task force or a couple task forces to investigate price fixing in the food industry. They singled out global corporations. Do you think there's much of that going on globally, price fixing?
I don't know, but investigate it. It's absolutely fine. If you don't have anything to fear, the investigation will yield no relevant results. There may be no effect, but what I say to the Trump administration every time that I have a minute that they give me to talk about economics is very simple. The way to solve what is happening in America with food prices and with the farming and agriculture sector is by deregulation. You need to deregulate, eliminate all these completely nonsensical regulations that have burdened the farming and the agricultural sector, that have demolished the manufacturing sector, that have made machinery more expensive, that have made investment more risky. And once you do that, which is not just changing, it's eliminating all these regulations, things are going to improve very, very quickly.
Daniel Akai at the Tertius Hedge Fund. Daniel, as always, thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
And turning now to negotiations around ending the Russia-Ukraine war. President Trump says Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky hasn't yet read the latest U.S. peace proposal.
And I have to say that I'm a little bit disappointed that President Zelensky hasn't yet read the proposal. That was as of a few hours ago. His people love it, but he hasn't. Russia's fine with it.
Yesterday, we spoke with Stephen Witkoff and Jared Kushner. I thank them for their readiness to work together 24/7. The American representatives know the basic Ukrainian positions. The conversation was constructive, although not easy.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials say at least 7 people were injured when Russian drones struck an apartment block in the country's northeast. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that unity between Europe, Ukraine and the United States is critical when negotiating an end to the war. He's in London today, rallying support among Kyiv's allies in US-led peace push.
Things which are very important for today, I think unity between Europe and Ukraine, and also unity between Europe, Ukraine and the United States. There are some things which we can't manage without Americans, things which we can't manage without Europe, and that's why we need to make some important decisions.
Now at the meeting, French President Emmanuel Macron said Russia's economy is now starting to suffer after the latest round of sanctions. Meanwhile, the German Chancellor said he's skeptical about certain aspects of the US position on ending the war, but he didn't give further details on his stance. Moscow says it's open to negotiations and blames Kyiv and the West for blocking peace. But Ukraine and its allies say Russia is stalling and using diplomacy to entrench its gains. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will meet President Trump on December 29th An Israeli government spokesperson made the announcement today.
They will discuss the future steps and phases and the international stabilization force of the ceasefire plan. The third phase of this plan will be focused on the de-radicalization of the Gaza Strip.
Netanyahu met with the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Mike Waltz, in Jerusalem earlier today. The meeting was attended by U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, and other officials. Over the weekend, Netanyahu said the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire was nearly complete, and that negotiations are now shifting towards a more demanding second stage. Meanwhile, Hamas said it was ready to discuss freezing or storing of its arsenal of weapons as part of its ceasefire with Israel. Here's what we know so far.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Sunday said the second phase of a U.S. plan to end the war in Gaza was close, but cautioned several key issues still needed to be resolved.
I'm going to discuss them with President Trump when I meet him later on this month.
Netanyahu's comments came while speaking to reporters alongside German Chancellor Friedrich Merz in Jerusalem.
I think it's important to make sure that Hamas complies, not only with the ceasefire, but also with their commitment, which they undertook, to disarm and have Gaza demilitarized. We're about to finish the first stage. We're there, almost. But we have to make sure that we achieve the same results in the second stage, and that's something I look forward to discussing with President Trump.
A ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is entering its second month, although both sides have repeatedly accused each other of violating the truce agreement. Since the ceasefire came into effect, Israel has carried out airstrikes that it says are fending off attacks or destroying militant infrastructure. Israel retained control of 53% of Gaza under the first phase of Trump's plan, which involved the release of hostages held by militants in Gaza and of Palestinians detained by Israel. According to the plan, Israel is to pull back further in the second phase, as a transitional authority is established in Gaza, and a multinational security force is deployed, Hamas is disarmed, and reconstruction begins.
And still to come, acting U.S. Attorney Alina Habba steps down after a federal court disqualified her. What she says about the court ruling and plans for the future. With that and more after the break. Welcome back. I'm Paul Greaney. Alina Habba, the acting U.S. Attorney for New Jersey, is stepping down. It comes after a federal court ruled that she was unlawfully appointed by President Trump. In a statement posted on X today, Habba said, quote, "As a result of the Third Circuit's ruling and to protect the stability and integrity of the office which I love, I've decided to step down in my role as the U.S. Attorney for the District of New Jersey. But do not mistake compliance for surrender. This decision will not weaken the Justice Department, and it will not weaken me," she said. Earlier this month, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals sided with the lower court decision and disqualified Habba because she was not confirmed by the Senate. Habba and the Trump administration have argued that Democratic senators are stifling the confirmation process. Habba said she will continue to serve as the senior advisor to Attorney General Pam Bondi for U.S. attorneys while she waits for further review of the court ruling. And it's day 4 of a hearing in the case against accused killer Luigi Mangione. His defense is attempting to get key evidence removed before trial. Our NTD reporter Arlene Richards was in the courtroom listening to another day of testimony.
So the prosecution called 2 witnesses. One was the first assistant district attorney, Nicole Smith, and the other one was police officer Christy Wasser. And both of them are from Altoona, Pennsylvania. Both of them testified about the search that was conducted at the McDonald's where Luigi Mangione was ultimately arrested. And as you know, the defense is saying that that search was conducted unlawfully, and they're attempting to have some of the key evidence removed before the trial.
And how did their testimonies help the prosecution?
So Nicole Smith, who is the first assistant district attorney, she testified that she was contacted by one of the lead officers who was on the scene at the McDonald's, and he was asking her about what charges he could charge. She said he was calling her to get her approval for this. And this is something that they commonly do, but she said they normally don't do it for charges like forgery and tampering with a license, which is what he was charged with. But this time they contacted her because they knew that this person might be the person that New York police would be looking for, and that they would probably ultimately have to turn over evidence to the New York police. So they wanted to make sure. She then went on to describe the differences between the types of evidence they found in his backpack. And one of them, she said, was called contraband, and the other one is inventory. And she made this distinction because some of that evidence was taken by the Pennsylvania police and kept, and other evidence was returned to the bag and went with Luigi Mangione to the correctional facility that he ultimately ended up at. So the contraband, which is things like the gun and the ammunition, can be taken over by the police. And the other items, such as his clothes, his food, the handwritten notes that are being talked about, those things went back into the bag. Later on, she says that they got 2 different search warrants. One search warrant was for the gun and the ammunition and other things like that that they wanted to keep. The second search warrant was so that they could turn the evidence over to the New York police, which they knew that that would be coming up. And then the Officer Wasser, she testified that the search was conducted incident to the arrest. Now, she was the officer who actually searched the backpack. And she said that, you know, the Mangione was taken under arrest first. He was handcuffed and he was told what the charges are before she touched the bag and actually opened it and began to search for the items. And then she also talked about the different items that she found, and that she was concerned at some point that there might be a bomb in the bag, because they actually asked Mangione whether there was anything in there that they should know about. And his answer was, I choose not to talk. So that, she said, raised her suspicion that there might be a bomb in the bag. Well, as I left the courtroom, Officer Wasser was still on the stand. I'm assuming that she was cross-examined by the defense, which they could do. And then I think this afternoon or later today, they're probably going to call more officers that were there on the scene, or they will call the actual district attorney of Blair County in Altoona, Pennsylvania, who also was involved in giving the approval for the charges. Now, there were ultimately around 8 officers who came to that McDonald's that day, and I think we've already had about 4 officers on the stand, so I'm expecting them to go through the other officers and get their testimony about what occurred that day, and also about the Pennsylvania law on search and seizure.
And the Supreme Court appears poised to back President Trump in an FTC termination. The justices are hearing a case over the legality of President Trump firing a Federal Trade Commission member. The Justice Department warns that the Supreme Court to overturn a 1935 precedent that limits presidential authority. It's a case that has shielded the heads of independent agencies from removal for decades. A lower court had ruled President Trump exceeded his authority when he moved to dismiss FTC member Rebecca Slaughter in March before her term was set to expire. Today, the justices signaled they will uphold the legality of President Trump's firing of Slaughter. We'll keep you updated on that. And President Trump will be signing an executive order this week on AI approval processes. He says this is to avoid having different rules in each of the 50 states.
Trump wrote on Truth Social today, quote, "There must be only one rule book if we are going to continue to lead in AI. We're beating all countries at this point in the race, but that won't last long," he said, "if we're going to have 50 states, many of them bad actors, involved in rules and the approval process." The president said he will be doing a one-rule executive order this week. Trump did not provide details. Leading AI firms have called for national AI standards instead of a 50-state patchwork of laws, but the move is likely to face some pushback from states who have previously warned of disastrous consequences if the technology is left unregulated.
As a Pacific nation ourselves, China respects our long-standing interests in the Indo-Pacific.
He also touched on the issue of America's support for its partners. Hegseth criticizes the fact that previous administrations seemed to overly focus on defending its partners, like Ukraine, instead of putting America first.
We will actually, for real, get our allies and partners to step up and do their part. we will no longer tolerate free riding. President Trump has shown the way with his historic leadership that yielded the commitments at NATO's Hague Summit. There, NATO committed to spend 5% of GDP on defense.
The US recently changed its policy on support for Ukraine. Instead of donating weapons directly to Kiev, Washington now sells them to NATO, which then sends them to Ukraine. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
And Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Secretary of War Pete Hegseth are welcoming their Australian counterparts to Washington, D.C. today. Here's Rubio on the future of the U.S.-Australian relationship.
This is something we share in common, not just with Australia, but with many of our allies around the world, the desire to diversify supply chains, and the belief that in order for us to be able to do anything, whether it's defend our countries, defend our allies, or defend each other, but also to build our economies and to prosper as economies, we have to have critical mineral supplies and supply chains that are reliable and that are diverse and not overly invested in one place where they can be used as leverage against us or our partners of the world. And so this is something that you'll find the U.S. and Australia working very closely on, and it's at the cornerstone of everything we plan to do together in the months and years to come.
This is the 40th annual ministerial meeting between the two countries. Rubio touted the strength of the U.S.-Australian relationship. He said the meeting today will help build on the momentum that came from the meeting between President Trump and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in October. Rubio also said he will visit Australia next year. The two Australian ministers said the U.S. is Australia's principal ally and the cornerstone of their strategic and foreign policy. They said their relationship is full steam ahead. Hegseth said that on the defense side, the two countries are working on force posture and industrial cooperation. The U.S. and Australia, both members of the Quad and AUKUS, countering Communist China's security threats in the Indo-Pacific, has also been a central theme of their relationship. And the Senate is expected to vote as soon as this week on whether to extend expiring Affordable Care Act subsidies. Meanwhile, Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana says he's preparing to send GOP leaders a health care proposal aimed at lowering premiums and directing more money to patients. In an interview with Fox News, he said his plan could reach the 60 Senate votes needed to pass. Here he is.
I think the White House and Republicans are very much in favor of Americans having affordable health insurance. They want Americans to have access. And the president's given pretty clear guidelines. He wants money to go to patients and not to insurance companies.
Cassidy says he wants Americans on Obamacare to shift into lower premium plans supported by expanded health savings accounts. He says subsidies, set to expire in January, could be restructured so that all funding flows directly to patients instead of to insurers. Cassidy says he's been in discussions with Democrats and believes both parties can agree on giving consumers more choice. And Congress will hold its first vote this week on a series of proposals to address the expiring ACA healthcare tax credits. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has the details.
The Senate will vote this Thursday on the Democrats' proposal to address the expiring COVID-era Affordable Care Act healthcare tax credits. The vote on Thursday is a commitment that Republicans made to Democrats, so a small group of Democrats would vote to reopen government last month.
I'm announcing that Senate Democrats will introduce legislation for a 3-year clean extension of the current ACA tax credits. This bill, a clean year 3 extension of the ACA tax credits that Democrats will bring to the floor for a vote on Thursday, and every single Democrat will support it. Every single Democrat.
The Democrats' demands, which caused the longest government shutdown in American history, have remained unchanged. A 3-year clean extension of the COVID-era tax credits would cost American taxpayer approximately $120 billion.
The COVID-era subsidy only affects 7% of Americans, okay? All this hullabaloo is over 7%. Now, Every American, 100% of Americans need their health care costs to come down. Republicans have ideas to do that. Now, what I've got to do is build consensus deliberately around the best ideas, and we've been working on that.
So sadly, this is not really a serious effort. Just to extend 3 years, something that has not been working, that was meant to be temporary from the beginning, is not a good vote. That's not a thoughtful vote to say we're just going to extend what we're doing.
Yeah. A group of bipartisan lawmakers in the House of Representatives have also proposed a 2-year extension with a commitment to agree on reforms by July 2026. These reforms could include income caps on beneficiaries as well as measures to reduce fraud.
We need action from this Congress, and all we're getting are stunts. Republicans obtained from the Government Accountability Office last week so that they could yell fraud, fraud, fraud to justify denying these credits. But if you look at the details of the report, it shows the fraud is coming from a group of insurance brokers and agents, that the Biden administration responded by suspending 850 of those people.
This Thursday's vote on the Senate floor on the Democratic proposal to address the expiring tax credit is expected to fail. A group of Republican senators have also proposed passing along the subsidies directly to consumers instead of to insurance companies. The tax credits expire by the end of December. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
And on Capitol Hill this week, a vote to make changes to the Department of War. Lawmakers this week unveiling the final defense bill that aims to lock in President Trump's agenda. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has the takeaways.
This year's bill will codify 15 of President Trump's War Department-related executive orders.
One of the most important pieces of legislation that we do every year, and it fits in very consistently with the President's Peace Through Strength agenda.
It aims to strip the Pentagon of programs like CRT, DEI, and climate initiatives, and refocuses on merit-based promotions instead of diversity to drive admissions to service academies. DOGE cuts are included, eliminating $20 billion in obsolete weapons, inefficient programs, and Pentagon bureaucracy. Enlisted service members would get a 4% pay raise. The bill would cement Trump's deployment of troops to the border to combat illegal immigration and drugs. As for policy abroad, lawmakers aim to strengthen U.S.-Israel military operations and ramp up defense in the Indo-Pacific to deter CCP aggression towards Taiwan.
She has ordered the People's Liberation Army to be ready to take Taiwan by force by 2027.
The CCP has conducted the largest military buildup since World War II. Countering China and Russia's technology and weapons development is also a focus in the newest defense bill. Lawmakers this week are expected to vote on the yearly defense bill. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
And Secretary of War Pete Hegseth is highlighting the Trump administration's effort to put America first in its policies. Hegseth spoke on Saturday at the annual Reagan National Defense Forum, pointing to similarities between President Trump and former President Reagan. According to Hegseth, multiple administrations after the Cold War did not put America first in its policies. NTD's Arian Pastar has the takeaways.
Their America Last bipartisan consensus is done. It is finished. Under President Trump's leadership, after decades of disastrous decisions by this nation's self-appointed so-called foreign policy elite, we're once again putting American interests first.
Secretary of War Pete Hegseth highlighting the Trump administration's policies in putting America first. On Friday, President Trump unveiled a national security blueprint in which he describes China as a central threat to the U.S. Hegseth touched on the topic as well. He says Washington isn't aiming to overpower China, but rather defending its own interest.
It's our job to make sure Beijing sees unquestionable U.S. military strength that, if necessary, can back up our national interests. Even as we make clear our peaceful intentions, we insist that.
And the Trump administration says it has located tens of thousands of children who were smuggled into the United States. Border czar Tom Homan is accusing the Biden administration of losing track of many more. Here's the story.
White House border czar Tom Homan says the Trump administration has thus far located 62,000 children who were illegally smuggled into the United States. In an interview with Fox News Sunday, Homan said the Biden administration lost track of 300,000 minors. He alleges many of those missing children ended up in sex trafficking or forced labor.
President Trump saved over 62,000 children's lives. Some of these children were in sex trafficking, we found them. Some were in forced labor. Some were being mistreated. I can't even discuss some of the mistreatment we found out about.
Homan says those children were among more than 500,000 minors smuggled into the country during the previous administration. He says the Trump administration has been actively searching for them.
Over 500,000 children were smuggled in this country under Joe Biden. They released them to unvetted sponsors. They lost track of 300,000. President Trump committed on day one that we will do everything we can to find every one of these children.
He accused Biden and Democrats of being complicit by refusing to secure the border.
For 4 years, this has happened. Sex trafficking, historic highs. Children crossing the border, historic highs. Migrant deaths crossing the border, historic highs.
Homan says finding missing children remains the administration's top priority. Meanwhile, Minnesota has become a focal point for immigration enforcement, with officials reporting widespread immigration fraud among Somali migrants. Homan told CNN that Minneapolis has a large illegal immigrant population and that enforcement teams are moving into the city. The intensified operation comes after a $1 billion welfare fraud scandal that federal prosecutors say involved criminal networks tied to parts of the Somali immigrant community. Prosecutors say the scheme exploited nutrition and childcare programs by creating fake service providers and pocketing taxpayer funds. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told CBS yesterday that investigators are now following the flow of overseas money transfers connected to the fraud.
But, when you come to this country, you got to learn which side of the road to drive on. You got to learn to stop at stop signs, and you got to learn not to defraud the American people.
Bessent said investigators found that funds tied to suspects, including some political donors, moved through informal money transfer networks. When asked if the money might have been used to support terror networks abroad, Bessent said it's too early to draw conclusions about its final use.
And President Trump will be signing an executive order this week on AI approval processes. He says this is to avoid having different rules in each of the 50 states.
Trump wrote on Truth Social today, quote, "There must be only one rule book if we are going to continue to lead in AI. We're beating all countries at this point in the race, but that won't last long," he said, "if we're going to have 50 states, many of them bad actors, involved in rules and the approval process." The president said he will be doing a one-rule executive order this week. Trump did not provide details. Leading AI firms have called for national AI standards instead of a 50-state patchwork of laws. But the move is likely to face some pushback from states who have previously warned of disastrous consequences if the technology is left unregulated.
And Paramount has launched an attempt at a hostile takeover of Warner Brothers Discovery. The move comes just days after Netflix reached a $72 billion deal with the company. Now, Paramount said it's offering Warner Bros. Shareholders $54.4 billion. It's about $30 per share in cash. Paramount is also offering to buy its cable assets. Now, President Trump raised concerns yesterday over the Netflix-Warner Brothers deal due to the size of their combined market share. The offer follows a deal in October between Paramount and news and commentary website The Free Press. Paramount installed founder Barry Wise as the editor-in-chief of its subsidiary, CBS News. And moving on, the White House recently published a media bias webpage where they shame reporters, the reports, and their companies for what they consider fake news. It's been listing individual news stories and categorizing them as lies, bias, mischaracterizations, etc. The administration has used different methods to combat what it sees as dishonest reporting. We saw it just now in the roundtable: direct live criticism of reporters, social media memes and posts, and now this webpage. With us now is Andrew Selapak, social media professor at the University of Florida. Professor, great to see you as always. Have you ever seen a more aggressive information campaign coming out of the White House?
Not when it comes to media bias. I mean, we know that in particular, Republican presidents, Republican members of Congress and the Senate have talked about media bias. I mean, you can go back to Nixon and looking at those things, but to actually have a page on the White House website where it's kind of picking individual stories and talking about media bias, that's pretty new and pretty unprecedented.
You think it might be effective?
I don't know if it's going to be very effective. And one of the reasons for this is, again, going back to Nixon, Reagan, Bush. We've had this idea that there's been a liberal media bias. And considering how people on the left feel about Donald Trump, I think what this is really doing is just sort of giving individual examples that are preaching to the choir. I think if you are a Trump supporter, you already believe the media is biased. And I don't know how much giving specific examples of is really going to make a big difference for those voters and those supporters.
Do you feel that as tech has kind of developed over the years, the speed at which the information travels has increased dramatically, as well as its reach? Do you see this administration's information campaign as perhaps a more direct response to this?
Well, that's entirely different, because what we're looking at with what the White House is doing right now is they're looking at sort of that mainstream traditional media and giving examples of media bias there. What we're seeing sort of in real time is the impact of social media and AI. We're seeing a lot of influencers who are doing, news content. I think a lot of people would kind of disagree to whether or not they're actual journalists, in that sort of Joe Rogan category, but are doing news content. The website's not taking a look at that, but I think there needs to be a recognition that overwhelmingly people are not going to traditional media to get their news and information. They're getting it anywhere and everywhere. And that often means social media. It often means sort of social media influencers, people who talk about the news, and an incredible amount of content that's coming from AI and bots.
You mentioned how some of the people who perhaps don't support President Trump may just see this as another political tactic, strategy from him. But on the other hand, how harmful can, say, misinformation, propaganda, bias be to any president's agenda, especially in a political climate like we have today?
Well, and we got to kind of look at it in sort of its relative terms, the media climate, the political climate, and also the technological climate. Because if you go back to, say, Barack Obama's presidency, or you go back to George Bush's presidency, to W's presidency, we didn't have the same social media, we didn't have the same AI, we didn't have the same amount of bots. We also didn't have so many people getting their news from that side. So we're really in a very different environment, and even kind of different from the Biden administration, because there's been this huge increase in growth in AI just in the past sort of 12 months, where there's so much more content being created by AI. And we even see different branches, different aspects, bureaucracy in the government using AI for content creation to put content out there. So misinformation is something that's going to be just increasing as we move forward. And it's not going to be created by individuals. It's going to be created by bots and AI. And the content we see is bots and AI. And the algorithms are kind of set up to feed us whatever seems to be popular. And as we have more AI and bots consuming content, it's whatever that's going to kind of make a determination of popularity that we as individuals will see in our timeline. So we're entering a very new space where just looking at traditional media, I think, is not recognizing the fact that such a small audience compared to the people on TikTok, on YouTube, on Instagram, on all of these other platforms who are consuming so much content and spending so many hours scrolling and looking, and this content's just hitting their feed.
I think for anybody who uses these platforms, the content in that feed, the AI versus the real, is becoming increasingly difficult to tell apart. It's actually frightening. Professor, I want to touch on this as well. Looking back during the Biden administration, like you brought up, there was, you could say, uproar about it setting up a so-called disinformation governance board, especially among people concerned about it infringing on free speech at the time. Is there an easy line to walk for the state to counter what it considers misinformation while not infringing on freedom of speech?
Well, and as you probably remember, it was sort of referred to as sort of the Ministry of Truth, using that sort of 1984 language. That was specifically looking at social media content. What the Trump administration is doing right now is looking at that traditional media content. You also have the difference of, we know during the Biden administration, where not just the Biden White House, but also some of the different alphabet agencies were contacting social media companies, kind of putting their thumb on the scale of what content should be seen and taken down. So that to me is much more concerning than, say, the Trump administration, the Trump White House having a website, kind of picking individual stories and sort of showing where there's media bias that's going on. Those to me are two very different things. The one, what the Trump White House is doing, is not necessarily that different than what Media Matters or the Media Research Center have been doing for decades now. That what the Biden administration was doing, especially because they had the ability to influence these social media channels at that time, that was much more concerning, and I think something we should be much more worried about, again, because that's where such a large part of the news consumer audience is, that sort of audience that's not paying attention to traditional media, they're not consuming traditional media, they're getting it overwhelmingly from social media. And if you have whether it's Biden, Trump, anybody moving forward, White House, being able to kind of put their thumb on the scale, that's what should be really concerning, not something that the Trump White House doing that we've seen in some ways and forms from different organizations for decades.
Well, how about on that point, Professor, got about a minute, on the social media, AI, disinformation argument and point that you're raising here, is there a place for the government to regulate this, or how do you walk this line between regulation and personal freedom?
That's where I don't think the government, because they haven't really passed anything since the Communications Decency Act of 1996, we're still kind of living under Section 230 of the CDA, and the government really hasn't done a lot when it comes to passing additional regulation. They're still kind of debating some of these bills that would have some regulations when it comes to young people, but in terms of overall content, Congress has really dropped the ball. They've decided to kick the can down the road, and they've not been doing much to do any regulation. So I don't see where there's anything that the government can do, because they're not willing to pass any laws to do anything. Instead, they'll every once in a while drag like Zuckerberg or some of these other CEOs of the tech companies in front of Congress, ask them questions. The CEOs will apologize, say they're going to throw billions of dollars at the problem. Everybody walks away and nothing really changes. So Congress has been kicking the can down the road, and I don't see them being able to do much until they decide that they actually want to tackle the issue, at which point it's probably too late in a way, because what they'll be tackling is the past and not the future with AI. So they've kind of dropped the ball, and it's becoming a larger and larger problem that's snowballing as AI grows.
Well, they're obviously not taking their inspiration from Australia, Professor, where they just banned social media for under 16s, which is quite the move. Professor Andrew Selepak, appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
And President Trump hosted the Kennedy Center Honors last night, becoming the first U.S. president to preside over the ceremony. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the annual event, which has celebrated major contributors to American arts and culture since 1978.
The ceremony honored actor Sylvester Stallone for the Rocky and Rambo series, in which he played the main characters, Gloria Gaynor for her song I Will Survive, the rock band Kiss, country music singer George Strait, and Tony Award-winning actor Michael Crawford.
They've given us immortal characters of the silver screen, truly immortal characters, unprecedented triumphs of the Broadway stage, and unforgettable music that has become part of the really soundtrack of our lives.
While at the event, the president addressed the blockbuster Netflix-Warner Brothers merger.
Netflix is a great company, and they've done a phenomenal job. Ted is a fantastic man. I have a lot of respect for him, but it's a lot of market share, so we'll have to see what happens.
United States Agency for Global Media Special Advisor Carrie Lake says she can't think of anyone better than President Trump to usher in what she called the golden age of arts.
He is a showman, but most of all, he loves to build, create, and restore. And as he's restoring America to its glory, to her glory, he's also restoring this building.
Lake says the arts bring people together.
You can be from America, you can be from another country, and you sit and you listen to a symphony. And everything, all the differences just melt away.
Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick echoed that sentiment, saying music and the Kennedy Center unite people.
Music is the greatest way to people's heart and to make them smile. And only this president loves sports and can do FIFA in the morning and Andrea Bocelli in the evening, right? So he covers all sides.
Actor Kelsey Grammer emphasized individuality as central to American cultural heritage, noting how music constantly evolves.
I thought music was dead in the 80s. I was like, oh my God, what the hell's happened to it? And then the grunge movement came along. I was like,
holy moly, these guys are making music again.
Trump has shown great interest in the Kennedy Center since his term began, including appointing a new board and initiating renovations. Kennedy Center President Richard Grenell highlighted a renewed focus on fiscal discipline under his watch.
I didn't cancel a single show. I just required all of our shows and all of the future shows to take ticket sales into account and donors and corporations. Between those three revenue sources, if you can't get to zero and not lose me money on your programming, I can't sign the contract.
President Trump on Saturday presented medals to the 2025 Kennedy Center honorees during a ceremony in the Oval Office, expressing his sincere thanks for the artists' lifelong contributions.
On behalf of every American who has been inspired by the unbelievable talent of Michael Crawford, who has been influenced by the music of George Strait or Gloria Gaynor or Kiss, or who has been moved by Sylvester Stallone's unmatched heart and talent and grit, because nobody played that role, and nobody will ever play that role like Sly.
The Kennedy Center honors are widely seen as the top U.S. recognition for lifetime achievement in the performing arts. President Trump hailed the slate of artists as perhaps the most accomplished and renowned class ever assembled. The full program will air on CBS and Paramount Plus on December 23rd. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
A performance that truly matters for each and every one of us. This is what you've been waiting for. See it at least once in your lifetime. Shen Yun. Get tickets now at shenyun.com.
Behind every headline in Washington, there's a story that could shape your future. With the Capitol Report, you get more than just the news. You get direct access to the White House and the Capitol. Every day, we bring you exclusive interviews with lawmakers, analysts, and experts, plus in-depth coverage of the decisions being made in Washington, D.C. Broadcasting live from the nation's capital, you witness events as they unfold, straight from the heart of Washington, keeping you connected, informed, and always a step ahead.
Say goodbye to harsh, bitter coffee and hello to a delicious, smooth brew. With specialty quality beans, expertly roasted in-house, you'll taste the difference with every sip. Fermented with a blend of 50 enzymes, Dave's Coffee delivers a rich brew like no other. Made with the highest grade specialty beans available, you're sure to taste the difference. Elevate your morning with Dave's Enzyme Fermented Coffee.